Sorry, the video got cut off. So going to the handout that I have here titled Categorical and Imperative Supplement, going to that, you first state your maxim, which is your reason for action. So let's look at that. I will borrow money and promise to repay it without the intention of doing so. Or more generally, the maxim would be, I ought to lie in order to get what I want. So that is your maxim. Your reason for acting in this case is that you need money because you're broke. And your maxim, in order to achieve that, is that you need to make a false promise. In other words, you need to say that you're going to do something with no intention of doing so. So then it's this paragraph here where it says explanation that goes on there for a while. It's explaining so Kant will say, once you have, here's how the formula works. I ought to lie in order to get what I want. Then what you do is you make that a universal rule, and you imagine a hypothetical world where there is a rule that anytime somebody needs something from somebody else, they should lie in order to get that thing. And the question is, can that serve as a law that governs human beings? Can that serve as a law? In this hypothetical imagined world, can there be a law that says everybody ought to lie in order to get what they want? Well, what Kant says here is that he says on page 35, he says, now I then see at once that it could never hold as a universal law of nature and harmonize with itself, but must necessarily contradict itself. For the universality of a law that everyone could promise whatever he fancies with the intention not to keep it would make the promise and the end one may pursue with itself impossible, as no one would believe he was promised anything, but would laugh about any such utterance as a vain pretense. So the Kant says that there would be a contradiction here, which is to say that promises would simultaneously have to mean something, but they would be utterly meaningless. Because I need the promise to mean something in order to get what I want, but the very meaning of a promise is that it needs to be kept. And so the very notion of promise keeping would undermine itself. Promises would be meaningless, they would mean nothing. And so in this imagined hypothetical world, there could be no promise keeping. And Kant says, therefore, it could not serve as a universal law of nature that everyone ought to lie in order to get what they want. Okay? So again, there's a longer explanation there in the notes that talks about that. But the question is, if my maxim, when I universalize it and make it true for everyone, leads to a contradiction, then it cannot be a moral maxim. It must be an immoral maxim. And what Kant thinks he has given, at least, is a kind of test to see whether or not maxims can, or whether or not certain actions and choices can be moral or not. And the intuition behind this may seem a bit abstract and odd, but the intuition behind this is simply this, that my particular circumstances, my particular conditions have nothing to do with the requirements of morality. That the rules and requirements that I would hold everybody else to also have to apply to me. There's nothing special about me. That there has to be a kind of fairness involved in the way that we imagine the choices and the rules that we propose. That the rules we propose for ourselves must be the rules we would be willing, or the rules we impose on everyone else must also be the rules that we would be willing to impose on ourselves. That morality doesn't carve out special exceptions for us. And that is really the intuition that lies behind what Kant is up to here. And so I hope that makes sense, that morality requires a kind of fairness in the procedures and the choices that we make, that morality's requirements apply to everyone unconditionally, regardless of who we are. I hope that makes sense. In Friday's readings, you're going to get a little bit more. You're going to get another way to figure out why it would be wrong to lie. It's just a slight variation on this one, and I will talk to you about that. I meant to say in Thursday's reading, I will give you that. So I will talk to you then, and let me know if you have any questions in the meantime.